The champagne flute didn't shatter. That was the first thing Mia noticed. That when the old man's sleeve caught the edge of the passing tray and sent a single arc of gold liquid splashing across Yunil-kwan's cream-color cuff, the glass simply rocked, steadied itself, and survived. The old man was not so lucky. Do you have any idea? Yunil's voice cut through the orchestral hum of Obsidian Plaza's quarterly gala like a blade finding a gap in armor. Do you have any idea what this suit costs? The room didn't go silent. That was the cruelest part. The conversations simply lowered, adjusted, the way water finds its level around an obstacle. 200 people in this cathedral of marble and chandelier light, and not one of them turned to fully face what was happening. They watched from the corners of their eyes. Senators' wives, hedge fund architects, the kind of people whose names opened doors that didn't have handles on the outside. They watched, and they calculated, and they chose. And the old man stood there, silver-haired, slightly stooped in his simple pinstripe shirt, doing the one thing that broke Mia's carefully constructed composure completely. He was trying not to cry. Not from shame. She could read the difference by now, after 8 months of watching people perform emotions in this building. This was the specific effort of a man who refused to give his humiliation an audience. His jaw was set, his hands, folded in front of him, trembled with the labor of his dignity. Yunil's finger jabbed the air between them like punctuation. People like you don't belong in spaces like this. Someone should have told you that at the door. Mia felt the tray in her hands, felt the weight of her smile, the one that had kept her employed, invisible, and safe for the better part of a year. The smile that didn't reach her eyes because her eyes were always somewhere else entirely, cataloging exits, calculating risks, staying small. She set the tray down on the nearest surface. Quietly, the way you set something down when you've decided you won't be picking it up again. Her name was Mia Adeyemi, and she had spent 11 months at Obsidian Plaza perfecting the art of not existing. It was a skill she'd cultivated long before this job, long before the marble floors and the velvet ropes and the quarterly galas where old money shook hands with new power over glasses of champagne that cost more than her weekly salary. She had learned early that a black woman in rooms like this survived by becoming architecture, by being the fixture that refilled your glass before you realized it was empty, that anticipated the draft before you felt the chill, that materialized exactly when needed and dissolved completely when not. She wore the smile like a uniform, pressed, professional, reaching precisely as far as her cheekbones and not 1 millimeter further. The other staff called her the ghost. They meant it as a compliment. She never caused scenes, never drew attention, never made the guests uncomfortable with the inconvenience of her personhood. Her supervisor had written in her last review, "Mia understands the assignment." She had filed that review away and decided it was the loneliest sentence she had ever read. Obsidian Plaza's quarterly flagship event was the crown jewel of Seoul's elite social calendar, an evening where the velvet ropes weren't decorative but architectural, dividing the room into invisible castes that everyone understood and no one acknowledged. Champagne towers glittered under chandeliers that cost more than most buildings. The guest list was curated the way museums curate collections, for maximum impression, minimum controversy. Mia had worked 7 of these events without incident. On the 8th, she watched an old man in a pinstripe shirt try not to cry, while a woman in a cream suit dismantled him in front of 200 witnesses who had collectively decided that silence was the sophisticated response. She did the math. She always did the math. It was how she'd survived this long. On one side, her job, her visa sponsorship, her carefully constructed invisibility. On the other side, an old man's trembling hands and the specific quality of his dignity, which reminded her, with a force that felt almost physical, of her grandmother standing in a government office 30 years ago, absorbing cruelty with the patience of someone who had decided that their behavior would not dictate hers. The math, for once, was simple. Mia stepped forward, and the ghost, for the first time in 11 months, chose to be seen. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. 11 months. That was how long Mia Adeyemi had worked at Obsidian Plaza, without anyone learning the color of her eyes. She had counted once, in the quiet of her studio apartment on the east side of Manhattan, sitting cross-legged on her bed with a cup of tea gone cold beside her. 11 months of quarterly galas and private luncheons and the kind of corporate dinners where men in suits decided the fate of zip codes they'd never visited. 11 months of being the hand that refilled the glass, the presence that cleared the plate, the smile, always the smile, that made guests feel attended to without feeling watched. She had perfected it in the mirror. The smile. It lived in her cheeks and the corners of her mouth and stopped precisely at the waterline of her eyes, which remained always somewhere else. Cataloging, measuring, finding the exits. Her supervisor, a tightly wound woman named Priscilla, who communicated primarily through the angle of her clipboard, had pulled Mia aside after her third event and said, with the particular warmth of someone giving a performance review, "You understand how this works. You don't make them uncomfortable." Mia had nodded and kept the smile in place. She understood perfectly what Priscilla meant. In a room full of Manhattan's most insulated wealth, the hedge fund architects, the political bundlers, the socialites whose entire occupation was the maintenance of their own mythology, the staff were meant to be infrastructure. Useful, quiet, essentially invisible. Mia had decided very early that invisibility was not a tragedy. It was a strategy. She moved through the plaza's grand hall the way water moves through an established channel, efficiently, predictably, without disturbing the banks. Her dark suit was pressed with military precision. Her hair swept back. Her tray always level. She had learned which guests preferred their champagne from the left, which ones startled easily, which ones were the kind of drunk that smiled too wide at the staff, and which ones were the kind that didn't see the staff at all. She preferred the latter. At least their indifference was honest. What she had not learned, what she had carefully, deliberately, surgically avoided, was being known. Known meant noticed. Noticed meant exposed. Exposed meant the particular vulnerability of being a black woman alone in a city that was always, in some register, taking attendance and finding her name in the wrong column. So she stayed a ghost. And, on the night of Obsidian Plaza's 8th quarterly gala of her tenure, she was very good at it. Right up until she wasn't. She heard it before she saw it. Not the words, the frequency. There is a specific pitch that cruelty takes when it has an audience and knows it. When it has calculated that no one in the room will interrupt it and has therefore decided to perform. Mia had heard that frequency before in different rooms, in different cities, and her body recognized it the way the body recognizes cold, not as information, but as fact. She turned. Unicorn was not a woman who entered rooms. She colonized them. Tonight she wore a cream-colored suit that probably had a name Mia couldn't pronounce, and a price tag that could have covered Mia's rent for 4 months. She was angular, aggressively maintained, the kind of beautiful that required significant infrastructure and expressed itself primarily as a weapon. The old man standing in front of her looked like he had wandered in from a different century. Silver-haired, slightly stooped, a simple pinstriped shirt under a dark jacket that had been pressed carefully and still somehow communicated the effort it had taken. His glasses were slightly askew, had been, Mia realized, since the moment his sleeve had caught the edge of a passing tray and sent a single thread of champagne across Yunal's cuff. It was barely a stain. It would have come out with a cloth napkin and 30 seconds of attention. Yunal was not interested in 30 seconds of attention. She was interested in 30 witnesses. "Do you have any idea what this costs?" Her voice carried across the orchestra's gentle undercurrent like a stone across still water. "Do you even understand what event you've wandered into? Who let you in here? Someone should answer for this." The old man did not respond. He stood with his hands folded in front of him and his jaw set with the precise tension of a man exercising tremendous control over something very close to breaking. He was trying, Mia understood with sudden and complete clarity, not to cry. Not from shame. From the effort of preserving his dignity in a room that had collectively decided his dignity was negotiable. 200 people. Senators' wives. Portfolio managers. A city council member, whose photograph Mia had seen on 3 separate campaign posters within a 4-block radius. And every single one of them was doing the same thing, the careful not quite looking, the conversation adjusted to a lower register, the full-body performance of having not noticed. Mia did the math. She always did. On one side of the equation, her job, her visa, her invisibility, which had kept her fed and housed and safe for 11 months in a city that did not naturally incline toward the safety of women like her. On the other side, the old man's hands which were trembling, not with fear, she realized, but with the labor of his composure. And something else. Something that hit her with the specific force of a memory she had not invited. Her grandmother, standing in a city office in Lagos, 30 years before Mia was old enough to remember anything. And yet somehow Mia knew the exact quality of that woman's stillness in the face of cruelty that had decided it was entitled to an audience. She set her tray down on the nearest surface. "Ma'am." Her own voice surprised her. Not its volume. She spoke at exactly the register required to be heard without shouting, but its steadiness. 11 months of performing calm had apparently made some of it real. Yunel turned. The full artillery of her attention swiveled toward Mia like a gun finding a new target, and for a half-second, the room's murmur dropped another notch. "I believe," Mia said, and she kept the smile, not the work smile, a different one that lived all the way up in her eyes and was not warm in the least, "that this gentleman's table is waiting for him, and that your suit, with respect, will survive the evening." The silence that followed was the kind that takes up space. Yunel's expression cycled through several calculations. But Mia had positioned herself, body between Yunel and the old man, tray surrendered, the full signal of someone who had decided this was the hill, and the calculation, apparently, did not favor scene with a witness this willing. Yunel turned, moved. The crowd rearranged itself around her departure, like water around a stone. Mia exhaled, and then she felt it. A hand, dry, light, deliberate, resting for exactly 1 moment on her forearm. She looked down at the old man. He was not crying. He was looking at her with an expression she did not immediately have a word for. Something between recognition and gratitude, and a third thing she couldn't name yet. "Thank you," he said, in English, so quiet it was almost not English, almost just sound. "My name is Mr. Ryu." He arrived 20 minutes later. Mia was collecting glasses near the east corridor when the room changed. Not obviously, not the way a room changes when someone loud enters it, but the way a room changes when something with significant mass moves through it and the air has to reorganize. She felt it before she identified the source. He was tall for the expectation the evening had built. Late 30s, she guessed, in a suit that had been cut with a kind of precision that cost more than Mia's monthly salary and was worn with the kind of ease that meant he'd never had to think about the cost. His face was composed, the particular composure of someone who had trained it there and maintained it the way other men maintained investments. He crossed the room directly to the old man. No greeting to the crowd. No performance of arrival. He stopped in front of Mr. Ryu, and he bowed. Not the shallow corporate nod that passed for deference in rooms like this. A real bow, back parallel to the floor, hands at his sides, the full length of it, held for 3 full seconds before he straightened. Mia had to look away. There was something in it too private for a stranger's eyes. She heard them speaking quietly in Korean. She heard, without understanding the words, the specific register of a son accounting for his father's dignity. And then, she wasn't sure why she looked back. She looked back. He was looking at her. Not the way the guests looked at staff, which was to say mostly not at all. Not with calculation or assessment or the particular exhaustion of someone being interrupted. He was looking at her the way you look at someone you've been told about and are now reconciling with the reality. And the reality has exceeded the description. "You helped my father," he said. His English was precise, unaccented, and quiet in the same way his father's had been, as though volume were something spent carefully. "I did my job," Mia said, which was not quite a lie and not quite the truth. Something in his expression suggested he understood the difference. "My name is Min-jun," he said. "Min-jun Ryu." He didn't extend his hand. He just said it, offered it, the way you offer something you think might matter later and don't want to treat casually. Mia felt, for the first time in 11 months, like someone in this building was actually looking at her. Not the uniform. Not the smile. Not the ghost. Her. It was the most unsettling thing that had happened to her all evening. And she had just stepped in front of a socialite with a pointed finger and a $1,000 suit. If you've been enjoying the story so far, subscribe to our channel. There's so much more coming, and you don't want to miss a single chapter. She looked him up that night. She told herself it was practical, professional, the reasonable thing to do when a stranger knew your name and your workplace and had looked at you like you were a landmark he'd been navigating toward. She sat on her bed with her laptop balanced on her knees and typed, Min-jun Ryu, New York. The results took 4 seconds to populate and approximately 30 seconds to dismantle everything she'd felt in the East Corridor. Ryu Group. Alleged ties to organized crime networks operating out of the Eastern Harbor District. Min-jun Ryu. Named in 2019 federal report as person of interest. Sources within law enforcement suggest the Ryu family maintains significant influence over port operations, import logistics, and... She closed the laptop. Opened it again. Read 3 more articles, 2 of which were more careful, alleged, purported, unconfirmed, and one of which had a photograph of Min-jun Ryu leaving a federal building in a suit exactly like the one he'd worn tonight. His expression the same composed unreadability, a lawyer at each shoulder. She thought about his bow, the full 3 seconds of it, the private language between a son and his father. She thought about Mr. Ryu's hand on her forearm. Thank you. She closed the laptop again and did not open it a 3rd time. She made tea instead and sat at her small kitchen window looking at the city and decided she would simply not think about Min-jun Ryu again. She was very bad at it. He came back the following Thursday with his father. They arrived at Obsidian Plaza at 2:14 p.m. She noted the time the way she noted everything automatically and asked for her by name at the front desk. Not for the service manager. Not for Priscilla and her clipboard. For Mia. Priscilla delivered this information with a particular expression of someone presenting a bill they didn't entirely understand. Mr. Ryu was carrying a small paper bag. Inside it, Mia discovered, was a container of tea, Korean, bitter, the kind her own grandmother would have approved of purely on the basis of its refusal to be pleasant. And a second container of what turned out to be rice cakes, presented without explanation. My father says you look like you don't eat enough, Min-jun said, and there was something in his face that might have been the outermost edge of a smile. Your father has known me for 4 days, Mia said. He's a good judge of character, Min-jun said. It doesn't take him long. They stayed for 40 minutes. Mr. Ryu asked her questions in a mixture of Korean and English, with Min-jun translating the parts that required it. And the questions were so magnificently ordinary. How long have you been in New York? Do you have family here? What do you do when the plaza is closed? That Mia found herself answering them, without her usual architecture of deflection. They came back the next Thursday, and the one after that. Min-jun always brought the tea. Always bitter. Always with the same unhurried, deliberate quality. As though the Thursdays were not a campaign, but a habit. As though he had simply decided she was part of his routine and was giving her time to reach the same conclusion. She did not find this comforting. She found it deeply destabilizing, which was perhaps worse. On the 5th Thursday, Mr. Ryu did not come. Min-jun arrived alone, tea in hand, and explained that his father had a doctor's appointment. Said with a lightness that was doing work, Mia noticed. Carrying something. Is he all right? She asked. He's stubborn, Min-jun said. Which is usually the same thing. They sat in the small staff lounge that Priscilla had apparently decided to allow them, which was its own kind of remarkable. And Mia found herself asking the question she'd been folding and unfolding for 5 weeks. The bow, she said. At the gala. You bowed to him like, she paused, reorganizing. Like the room wasn't there. Min-jun looked at his tea for a moment. The room is never the point, he said. For your family, I think the room is often the point. He looked at her then, and she understood she'd walked up to the edge of something. She didn't retreat. I've read about your family, she said. Steady. Factual. I know, he said, which was not a denial. Is it true? He was quiet for long enough that she counted it. 7 seconds. Some of it, he said finally. Enough of it that I won't insult you by saying otherwise. She thought about a man who bowed like the room wasn't there, who brought bitter tea on Thursdays, who had looked at her in a crowded hall like she was the only architectural feature worth noting. A man who bows to his father like that, she said slowly, is not entirely the thing the papers describe. Min-jun said nothing, but something in his face settled, like a frame finding level. Subscribe to our channel and keep watching. The best parts of this story are still ahead. It happened by accident, the way the important things usually do. He had come for a Thursday visit and stayed into the evening, a first, because Mr. Ryu had called during tea with 3 separate questions about a family matter that Min-jun needed to answer quietly. And Mia had said, without quite deciding to, "You can take that in the kitchen." And then she'd started cooking because it was dinner time and she was hungry. And somewhere between the rice going on and the vegetables going in, she turned around to find Min-jun standing at her sink, washing the prep bowls she'd dirted, with the particular focused competence of someone who had washed dishes before in a kitchen that mattered to him. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said, and kept doing it. She watched him for a moment. The suit jacket was folded over the back of her kitchen chair. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. He was washing each bowl thoroughly, rinsing it twice, setting it in the rack with care. There was no performance in it. That was the thing. There was no awareness of being observed, no calibration for her benefit. It was just a man washing dishes in a kitchen because there were dishes that needed washing and he was present and capable. She had spent 11 months identifying performances. She was good at it. This was not one. Something in her chest did a thing she didn't immediately have language for. She turned back to the stove and stirred things that didn't need stirring, and decided not to examine it yet. He noticed the photograph on his 3rd visit to her apartment. It was small, framed in wood that had been painted blue, and then worn back to grain at the edges. And it sat on the narrow shelf above her radiator beside a plant she'd kept alive through sheer stubbornness, and a postcard from a city she'd never visited, but had always meant to. She came out of the kitchen to find him standing in front of it, very still. "This woman," he said, not quite a question. "My grandmother," Mia said. "She died when I was 9. I didn't know her well, but my mother always said I looked like her." Min-jun turned. His expression had gone somewhere she hadn't seen before, not the composure, not the outer edge of a smile, but something open and careful and a little raw. "I knew her," he said. The sentence arrived in Mia's understanding in pieces, not all at once. "That's not possible," she said. "She was a customer," Min-jun said quietly. "In Seoul. My father's family had a shop. Before everything else, before America, before all of it, they had a shop, and she used to come in on Saturdays. My father has spoken of her for my entire life. The woman with the Lagos accent who argued about prices and always won." Mia sat down on the arm of her couch without deciding to. "He called her," Min-jun continued, "the most dignified person he'd ever had the privilege of losing an argument to." She looked at the photograph, at the woman who had stood in a government office and refused to let cruelty dictate her posture, who had passed that refusal down through blood Mia hadn't known was carrying it. He saw her, Mia said, mostly to herself. "Yes," Min-jun said. "We tend to." She had been careful her whole life. Careful was the architecture that had kept her fed and housed and functioning in a world that had, on multiple documented occasions, demonstrated a preference for her smallness. Careful was the smile and the ghost and the math she did in every room before she committed to anything. Careful was how she'd survived. She was so tired of surviving. It was a Tuesday, not a Thursday, which felt significant, like the rupture of a pattern she hadn't consciously maintained. And Min-jun was sitting across from her at the small table in her apartment, and they had been talking about his father's health, and then about her mother in Lagos, and then about nothing in particular, which was somehow the most intimate conversation she'd had in years. He paused mid-sentence. "You've gone quiet in a specific way," he said. "I'm deciding something," she said. "What are you deciding?" She looked at him. The whole of him, the careful composure, the Thursday tea, the dishes washed with no performance, The way he'd looked at her grandmother's photograph like it was a landmark he recognized from story he'd been told his whole life. "I'm deciding," she said slowly, "not to be careful about this." Something in his face broke open quietly, like a door that had been holding its breath. She stood up, across the 4 feet of space between them with the specific clarity of someone who has stopped doing math and started making choices. And Min-jun stood too, as if he'd been waiting for exactly this, not the permission, but the meeting. The embrace, when it came, was not tentative. It was the embrace of 2 people who had been thorough about arriving at it. She felt, against the side of her face, the steady measure of his breathing. She felt, for the first time in 11 months, perhaps longer, not like a ghost. Not like infrastructure. Not like something the room had failed to notice. Like someone who had been found. Don't stop here. Subscribe to our channel and comment where you're watching from. We would love to say hello and follow this journey with you. 8 months later, Mia walked into Obsidian Plaza's annual gala in a dress the color of deep water. The same chandeliers. The same orchestral current running beneath the crowd's murmur. The same velvet ropes dividing the room into its invisible architectures of power and proximity. Different everything else. She was not carrying a tray. She was not wearing the smile that stopped at her cheekbones. She was not cataloging exits or calculating the cost of being noticed. Min-jun's hand was at the small of her back, present, unhurried, entirely unbothered by the room's assessment. And Mr. Ryu walked at her left, silver-haired and slightly stooped in a suit that had been pressed with the same careful effort as always. And he was talking, as he had been talking since they arrived, about a woman in Lagos who used to argue about prices on Saturdays and always won. She spotted Yunil Kwan across the room in the first 20 minutes. Yunil saw her too. The recognition arrived visibly, a slight recalibration, the eyes moving from Mia to Min-jun to Mr. Ryu and back, the math being done publicly and not landing anywhere comfortable. Mia let the smile come, the real one, the one that lived all the way up in her eyes, and did not apologize for being there. She did not go to Yunil. She did not need to. Victory, she had learned, did not always require a confrontation. Sometimes it was simply the act of occupying a room you were once invisible in, with your hand in the hand of someone who had learned your grandmother's name from his father before he ever learned yours. Mr. Ryu touched her arm, the same gesture as the night of the champagne and the cream suit and the crowd that had done its math and chosen silence. "She is here," he said softly, meaning Yunil. "I know," Mia said. "Are you all right?" She looked around the room, at the chandeliers throwing their geometry of light across the marble, at Min-jun beside her, watching her with the steady attention of someone who had decided 8 months ago on a Thursday with bitter tea that she was worth the patience of being known, at the room that had once required her to be a ghost and now, because she had set down a tray and stepped forward for an old man in a pinstripe shirt, held her like she'd always belonged in it. "More than all right," she said. And she meant every syllable of it. And that, right there, that moment where Mia stood in that room, seen, claimed, and completely at home, that is exactly why we tell stories like this one. Because some of us have spent a long time being ghosts, moving carefully, doing the math before we let ourselves feel anything. And sometimes it takes one moment, one decision to set down the tray and step forward, to change the entire trajectory of your life. Mia didn't just find love. She found herself. And we were honored to tell that story with you. If this story moved you, if you felt something in that bow, in those Thursday teas, in the way Min-jun washed dishes like it was the most natural thing in the world, please give this video a thumbs up. It takes 2 seconds, and it tells us that stories like this one matter to you. And trust me, we will keep delivering them. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit that button and turn on your notifications, because the next story we have coming is already asking to be told, and you do not want to arrive late to it. And before you go, drop a comment and tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Was it the bow? The kitchen? The grandmother's photograph? The gala? We read every single one, and we love knowing which parts of the story found you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being the kind of person who chooses the story where the invisible girl gets to be found. We'll see you in the next one.